Yeah. Well, she's a co-host, so now she can unmute herself if she likes.
I will unmute myself. Yes, I'm going to watch the waiting room for you.
You think y'all? Yep. Okay. So, hi everybody. Welcome to our to TagCon 2022's Paranormal panel, and our guest speaker for this panel is Brandy Stark, who you should be able to see on your screen. And Brandy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So, as she said, my name is Brandy Stark. I have been studying the paranormal actually throughout most of my academic career. So I started in 1997 with my first paper. I wrote about Homer and the role of ghosts in the Greek afterlife and how that transformed the Greek afterlife. And from there, I just started to explore local lore and legends. I continued to focus on the role of ghosts in history and culture. And it kind of expanded. I started doing paranormal investigation also in 1997, which is really bizarre, but here we are. I didn't see that coming. So I've been very fortunate, and believe it or not, even with the blue hair, I'm on this side of sanity, I hope anyway. I have degrees in history, classics, religious studies, humanities, literature, and education. So I spent a lot of time focusing on this. When I'm not doing this, I'm an artist. And in fact, I'm looking a little frazzled because right before this, I had to run to my studio to make an art sale. Yay. But it's been a weird May. I don't know anymore. But I was really excited when they asked me to speak for this convention. I've always loved sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm just delighted to be here. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. This is so awesome.
Well, what I did this time was I thought, well, instead of you staring at me and me staring at you, I would do just a little PowerPoint presentation. It's relatively short and it's kind of cursory, but it might give us some talking points to move from. And I did try to bring in the Grail series a little bit with the Pegasi. Please ignore my pronunciations. I speak
perfect. You said it right.
But my accent, I don't know. I come from St. Louis, Missouri, and unfortunately, that just gets to be a weird thing. But is it showing up okay?
Let's see, something's turning.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so what we get is the whole view of it and not the slideshow version, but that's fine to go through it that way.
Okay, so you're seeing the whole view.
Yep.
So this is just a little thing on elementals. It's kind of interesting because the elementals that
hang on one second, Brandy, you're on for what we see, you're on slide 7.
Okay, that's odd.
That's why I'm saying we don't see the slideshow version of it. We see each one of the individual slides over on the, yeah, we get the, I'm going to work on it view. So yeah, there you go.
So let me try again. Let me try current slideshow from the still just the weird slides.
Yeah, you might have to like share your screen and then share it again once you've started the slideshow.
All right, let me do that. I will stop.
I think that happened to me also. You have to kind of start and stop at the exact whatever thing you're doing. It's strange.
This will do it.
There we go.
Woo! Yay!
So this is just a little thing on elementals, and I think it's kind of fun, but a lot of folks don't realize that okay, now why are you not flipping? That elemental is not really as old as people think. So we have a fellow by the name of Paracelsus, who is a Renaissance fellow, and he is really given credit for wedding alchemy, medicine, and magic. So he is one who actually pulls from the ancient Greeks, and we'll talk about them in a minute, to actually come up with a system that he wrote into a book called, and I always love this title, A Book on Nymphs, Sylphs, Pygmies, and Salamanders, and on Other Spirits. And he actually had this published after he died, because that's what you did at that point in time, right? So we're post-Reformation, but we still don't want to upset the church. He loved the topic. He really believed that these were spirits that represented the grandeur of God. And if anybody is interested, I did include a link on an article that I thought was really pretty good about him. Now, he does pull from the Greeks, but he expands the ideas a little bit further. The Greeks themselves, they started off in the classical period, and of course, the Greeks are kind of the pinnacle philosophers of the ancient world. And so they're trying to explain the existence of reality and nature, matter, how we get to be here. So the debate actually simmered down to basically the quote unquote simpler elements. So we have earth, wind, water, fire, and then they include ether. And ether is kind of a weird thing because it can be either a spirit or a void. But it was considered, for example, if water is the basic building block of the world, then it would kind of explain some of the ideology of the world emerging from water, fire for spirit, etc. So it was a very complex system, but it was a fun one. We do still find some of these concepts exist. The Persians talked about it, and so does Hinduism actually still in modern times. I had a Hindu guest speaker who would come to my religion classes and would talk about the funeral pyre as basically reducing a person back to ash or earth, releasing the water. Of course, when one dies, the air is released from the body. They are consumed by the fire, and so they become one with the fire as the body is consumed. And what I thought was really interesting is he said, and then the fifth element is the void. And this particular gentleman is also now probably a retired doctor from a local children's hospital, but he basically talked about the space within that really matches up with what modern science is talking about, with the idea that molecules have all this space and technically nothing really touches, which I think is great. It is adopted by NRMs, and an NRM is basically a new religious movement. So that would include things like some of the modern pagan and Wiccan ideals. And then I just kind of plugged in those four categories. So gnomes, undine, sylph, and salamander. Now, over time, this is a beautiful tie into animism, which basically kind of has this idea that nature has a solar spirit. These souls and spirits become personified more and more. And if you look at the world around us, I can see why nature would be considered to be quite divine. The trees are quite mystical. They move in the wind. Nature has a way of balancing itself. I mean, we can get into the Eastern religions if anybody is ever interested, but that's a different topic anyway. But the notion of the self-balancing nature and of living in an existence of the moment. So through the Western ideals, we kind of see this evolve into nymphs, dryads, fauns, okeanids, oreads, the literal spirits of trees and rivers and the ocean and rocks. And they're interesting because while they're long-lived, they're not immortal. If whatever it was they were attached to died, they died. And there's actually a couple of cute little mythic stories that one of my very favorite talks about. There was a tree that was coming down, and this man heard the tree's nymph crying because she was about to die. And he was actually able to tie a rope around the tree and secure it so that it would survive. And out of gratitude, the nymph married him. And I'm like, well, that's so sweet. We do know that meteors, for example, were thought to be stones endowed with special powers. They actually get their own category because, of course, they come from space, which is kind of a very fun element here. Pop culture, as I said, this is a kind of a shotgun approach, and we're just kind of moving straight through. And if I'm talking too quickly, if anybody wants me to slow down, just let me know. But I wanted to make sure to leave some time for you guys, questions, comments, and I'm hoping some discussion because that's fun. As a paranormalist, of course, everybody has to go back to the Ghostbusters, and there is a Ghostbuster wiki out there. If you do not know, there's a whole site. I was like, neato. And the Ghostbuster wiki actually talks about elemental spirits. And according to this pop culture, they are connected to one of the four primal elements: fire, air, water, or earth. So they're sticking to that classical core. But these are spirits that retain aspects of their mortal identity. And that gets to be kind of interesting, that they are somehow attached to a personification. Eventually the Ghostbusters do expand. And in fact, the cartoon had this. So fire included electricity, water included ice. These spirits are not driven by a vendetta against individuals, nor do they restrict themselves to a single manifestation point, because of course they're, as with DC Comics, for example, they'd be attached to the green, this essence of nature that goes through the entire world that folks like Poison Ivy can connect to. So they are kind of a more worldly, there they go, sorry, more worldly type of entity. And speaking of entities, I better give you all this heads up. In addition to everything else that I've got going, I have a grumble of pugs and they are very badly behaved. I just live here and pay the bills and they do everything else. So I apologize, but I was hoping they'd go to bed. I came so close. Anyway, so close. From a more paranormalist point of view, this gets to be kind of interesting because usually they are not considered human at all. So they kind of fall into a category along with angels or demons as not having been human. They've never lived, but they are still higher level beings. So they're under demons and angels, but they're above human. They don't have that human connection and they tend to be much more enigmatic. And at this point within paranormal investigation, you start to see things getting much more occultish. So I really don't mess with this. I tell folks I deal with ghosts and that's plenty, ghosts and spirits, that's it. People even ask me, well, what about UFOs? And I'm like, nah, I'm just waiting for the Vulcans to show up. You know, and it had a little tiny bit of interest in cryptozoology, but ultimately, I think you just got to focus. So I'm here for the ghosts and the spirits, but I will, talk later if anyone's interested. We've had a couple of cases where a couple of the investigators thought we were dealing with actual elementals. But the idea here is that, again, they are independent, unpredictable, unlike ghosts and spirits, which already run with the whole gambit of their own rules and regulations. They have their own set. And so again, definitely less connected to the human identity, and they can be very hard to remove. So once you have an elemental, what do you do? Usually from the occult standpoint, they are tied to hermetic magic, some shamanic magic as well. And they do become very popular in TV and movie productions as being tied to blood. So bloodletting, like blood imps, become a thing. You can have corrupted elementals. I've got a corrupted puggle. There we go. These are people with a darker side who conjure elementals who are usually angry or dark. And of course, that fits nicely with nature as well, because we have sunny days, which are beautiful, and sunny days, which are lethal, right? We have rain that helps. We have torrential rain that can kill. So nature in itself has this dichotomy. And again, keeping with that aloof nature, and you do see this somewhat in the Japanese ideals, Shinto and anime as well. Nature is, it's more impartial in many ways. So I think the elementals in this case have to take their cue from whoever conjures them. Now, when we deal with this particular topic, we've got the Pegasi, and they're pretty interesting because they tie in with kind of a new level of elemental, since they're light and plasma based, or light/plasma based. They do require light to survive. So again, they are part of the conditioned world. They do require sustenance. They do interact with their environment, but they're definitely higher powered or higher form of being, in the sense that they are able to manifest in so many different ways. And of course that they are trans-dimensional. So they have the element of telepathy. There's even a shamanic undertone to them, with the idea of the mental connection. So having that telepathic connection to specific and special individuals, and that is a secret they're not supposed to share. So the shamanic ideal kind of fits in nicely there, that you have the specialized knowledge that only a rare few can have, and you do have to keep it secret. You have to be initiated or selected to have that happen. So to me, they also remind me a little bit of what are called spirit movements or spiritual movements. So this would be a new religious movement ideal, in which essentially you have an intermediary being that communicates with specialized people. We do know, for example, in the 70s, there were the Seth novels or the Seth journals, if anybody remembers those, where there was a woman who claimed that a higher level being was writing through her. So that's another thing that this kind of reminded me of a little bit, even though technically there's no books being written, it's still that channeling aspect. They're definitely alien in manifestation, and in nature. We don't fully understand the Pegasi. And what we do know is a little unpredictable. They are able to be controlled, which I think is interesting, particularly with some of the darker elements of actually withholding light from them to control them. And again, I mentioned the shamanic nature. So there you go. So this is just my little plug here. If anyone is interested, then we'll just open it up to discussions or questions. I will tell you very quickly my paranormal investigation with elementals. One was in Tampa, Florida. This was a house that had kind of an in-ground floor, which you don't find a lot in Florida, because essentially you dig down about 20, 30 feet and you hit water at some point. But while we're in there, and it was an African-American couple that owned this particular property, and they were friends of one of the investigators, and one of them was a sensitive, and she ghosts that we're investigating. And I said, well, what is it then? She said, well, do you know those troll dolls? I'm like, well, yes, not quite knowing where this is going, because we've tried to really put a very professional type of polish to the Spirits of St. Petersburg team. And I'm thinking, oh Lord, we're talking about troll dolls. But she said it kind of looks a little bit like a troll doll, but she said it's attached to the land itself. Whatever this is it's not a ghost at all, but it's really attached to the land. And I thought, okay, I mean, what do you do with that? And I said, well, is there any reason why it's upset or communicating? And basically the answer was no. I did work with this particular investigator for about 10 years, and it was basically the only time she ever came up with a troll with an earth elemental. I'm like, okay, good. We have come across them. If anybody in the area is familiar with Haslam's bookstore, I did have at this point, she was a Wiccan practitioner, but she was also sensitive, and she did believe that they had an elemental attached to that. Again, it was very enigmatic, feminine, which was interesting because the other one was masculine. So probably also tied to nature, but plant life perhaps. So, and again, I never quite know what to do with that other than to document it and just say, well, is it unhappy? Because if it's happy, then we're not going to mess with it. And these guys seem to be pretty cool with everything. They just happened to be around and curious as to what we were doing. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, there's no way for instrumentation to measure this. And again, you start moving towards the idea of personal belief and thoughts when it comes to that sort of thing. So, I just said, well, let's not poke at them, and let's say thank you so much. And I hope they have a great day. Off we go. So, if you guys are curious, we do have a website, which I did post up here. You can email me if you ever have any questions. I try to answer as honestly as I can. Did I mention the book? I can't remember. We have Supernatural St. Petersburg and Paranormal Panelist, which is kind of some of the lesser known haunts, and that is basically up on Amazon. And if you guys are really, really curious about this topic, which I was surprised at, We do have a podcast on paranormal pets, of all things. And so that's on petliferadio.com. I think you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. So animals as ghosts, animals experiencing ghosts, people who can channel animals.
Brandy, you would be actually not surprised because I have a really good friend who is a pet medium psychic. She does readings of deceased animals for people. So I am not at all surprised. This is fabulous.
We have hit, I think we're up to about 120 episodes. So that was just something I didn't see coming, because it's a voluntary thing for me to be doing. Yeah, I mean, I've been really amazed. And in fact, guys, would you please say? Not you guys, sorry, my pugs are getting rambunctious. Really? Oh, okay. Speaking of elementals, but anyway, we also, I actually have a paranormal pug that I will take on certain investigations, and the two youngsters that you're hearing in the background who simply will not go to bed are actually the next generation of paranormal pug to be. So specialized cases, all sorts of things that I had to check off before they get to come, but it's kind of neat. So now I will stop this sharing. Hey, I'm back. So are there questions, comments, ideas?
Yep, we have some questions from the audience. One second, and let me get those up here. So I'm going to do them a little out of order because one of them references back to something you said earlier in the presentation. They wanted to know, how do the salamanders fit in?
So the salamander is the fire element. And I've always found that rather intriguing. I did research it once as to why salamanders, and it relates to kind of a bizarre, you have to remember that the Renaissance is modern, but it also is coming out of kind of the medieval concepts. And so you end up with these odd legends like the weasel representing fertility, because there's this obscure Greek myth that talks about a woman who is transformed into a weasel and who could only give birth as a weasel through her mouth, and you're like, okay. So the salamander kind of ties into that really obscure ideology, the coloring, the need for heat. And so its association as a fire being.
Okay, so the next question we had was, does your paranormal investigation include the concept or dimensions of existence of a multiverse?
Ooh, yes, actually, we do talk about that from time to time. And I think that's a rather intriguing thought. Even Sylvia Brown talked about levels of existence, and as we kind of transdimensionally evolve through these dimensions. Right now we're trapped in earth, wind, water, fire, space and time, emotion, spirit, and we kind of keep going up these levels. And that essentially, let me put it to you this way, from a point of view of religious studies, we ultimately have two worlds. So we have the supernatural or unconditioned world that's beyond time or space here. And then we have our world, which is conditioned and natural, which is tied to time and space on this level. And so there's kind of this schism, but in between these two levels, there's communication. And so that's where you get what's called the liminal state. And ultimately you get the shamanic, the priestly, angels, demons, elementals, ghosts, mediums. So awareness of these multi-dimensions, the ability to communicate or bend rules of space and time, all of that would make quite a bit of sense. Yeah.
Cool. I forgot to say who the questions were from. So that question was from Shelley, and the one about the salamanders was from Kathleen Smith. And so now Lucy Hannes, and I apologize if I'm butchering your last name, Lucy, but Lucy wanted to know, how do the vortexes affect the paranormal world, and are they a real factor in attracting the paranormal?
Yes, and in fact, right before this, as I mentioned, I'm looking a little hairy because we're trying to make an art sale because I had the bright idea of giving up full-time faculty status to go part-time and to do art. So here we are, like a brilliant person. So when folks want to meet you at your studio, you go. And part of the reason why I bring that up is that my studio has a vortex. It's in a building that goes back to 1916. Here's the weird thing. I was called in with my team in 2013 to investigate this building. And back then, my team picked up that there was this area on the second floor that you feel very dizzy. You actually kind of feel like there's a wind around you. Really, guys? And ultimately, it was an unstable vortex, and that it would kind of open and close and let beings come through, kind of like a teleporter, if you will. In 2018, out of nowhere, I didn't have any plans for an artist studio, and I was still kind of making my plans to get out of education full time. And the head of the organization approached me and a few others, and she's like, "We've got a studio space. Do you want to see it?" And I'm like, okay, I can see it, but I don't want to studio. And I had to have it. I had to have it. I mean, for 2 weeks, they made me sweat to see if I would get it, and I got it. And so from 2018 until now, I've been able to be in a haunted building to kind of watch the vortex. I find it interesting because I take the pugs through and the pugs pick up on the vortex. We have attempted to measure the floor and slanted the floor. I mean, the building is older, so, and it does have the original wood floors. But absolutely. So the idea of the vortex is that it might act kind of like an exit ramp, if you will, off this supernatural highway. And so people can kind of come through like a door and open and close it. And it is supposed to be kind of a power source as well. There go my bugs again, sorry. They're having a good time though, if you can't tell.
You know, this reminds me of a meme or cartoon I saw everywhere on Facebook about a cat yawning. You may have seen this one, and it says, how many times do I tell this cat to stop opening vortexes? Somebody took a picture of a yawning cat with a rainbow coming out. It's hilarious. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't seen that one, but it's interesting because cats symbolically represent sorcery. So they're able to sense sorcery.
Right.
Magic, and they're associated with magic, and the canines are supposed to be, they are sensors of the dead. So they actually help to divide the realms of the living and the dead. So you get Hades and Cerebus or Carabus, his dog, and Sedna and her dog, and even the paranormal pugs, who are not really dogs. They're just canoid, but they are small, slightly misshapen humans. So as long as y'all. So anyway, I hope I answered that question, but absolutely. I mean, there are groups that actually speculate that ghosts should be able to almost like pop from one location to another through these vortexes, which I don't know if I'm necessarily going to agree with that, but there is something called a drop-in entity in paranormal investigation, which is very, very irritating because there's no way to tie it to history, but it's simply somebody that didn't die on the location, but either was there many years ago, but there's no record, or they just are attracted to it. They just like it. And so they show up. They're like, well, come on, can't you give me something? Because I mean, you can tell a skeptic, oh, it's a drop-in entity, and they'll be like, yeah, okay. So it works so much better. For example, with my building, I know who the ghost is because it served as a department store for 70 years. And it's the owner of the department store who keeps coming in because it was his flagship business. So, and you can tie it in. People will describe the man and I'm like, does he look like this? So there, you know, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
I was going to apologize that my own cats are having a yowling thing here. So you got dogs and a cat screaming.
They are so good, and they go to bed until I have to talk to people.
Sure. It's just like small children. Yes.
Medicated them with catnip, so-called, you know, but it does help. They stayed off for about an hour or two, and they're back now.
Oh,
Sanity.
Yeah. Charmaine added, is anyone else starting to look over their shoulder constantly while listening to this discussion?
profit entities, yay!
Yeah. I was going to say, do you think that there are paranormal entities everywhere, or are they only focused in certain places? Like, you know, my house is like 33 years old or something like that. You know, could I expect to find one in my house, or would something needed to have happened on this property in the past for that to happen?
And that's where things get interesting, because what a lot of people don't realize is the number one story that I get is family. So usually, and in fact, my first experience with anyone coming through was my grandmother when she passed. And the strongest experiences I've ever had on a personal level are family. So you do get family, but a family is not really a ghost. It's something akin to like something called a crisis apparition, where they show up to give you some information, even if it's, I'm okay, I'm watching over you. They do show up for that. And so you can have that type of thing. That's more of a spirit, because they kind of go back and forth. They check in on you and they move on, and they come back. They may check on you for holidays. They may just show up every now and again just to remind you that they're watching, which my mother uses as a great weapon, because she lives next door to me, and she's like, when I die, I'm going to be around. And I'm like, oh,
You'll never get rid of her. No, I'm just...
That's why she's so funny, because I'm like, I'm gonna have to jump in front of a bullet for you now, because I know where you are on this side. I don't know about the other side. But so you can have that. Now you can also have what's called an attachment. So something can come through an object, something portable, so antiques. Sometimes it's tied to the land. Florida is not so big on this, but Gettysburg, for example, with the Civil War, that massive bloodshed. You don't find that a lot down here, because we like to build things and tear them down, but it does happen. You can actually have an attachment itself. They really are not killing each other, I promise. Oh my gosh, okay. Someday when they're old and toothless little old pugs, I'm totally going to miss this, but right now I do not. Anyway, so it just really kind of depends. So the idea that something has to happen on a location can produce a ghost, but there are other reasons.
That's okay. My cats are screaming there too, so I don't know if you can hear them.
It wouldn't be so bad, except they're vocal, but that's okay.
Maybe they can feel something, some vortex or something happening.
Right now they're just excited. It's been a long hot day, and I'm waking up in the air conditioning. I don't know, but Penelope, come on. She also just
had a convention full of weather events, because thunderstorms were like thunderstorms predictions were for like half of the people on the panels. It's like, why is this happening now?
Yeah, because we all live in different parts of the country, and there's been different, like Canada has got hit, New Jersey got hit, and Missouri got hit the other day, and yeah, it's just been crazy.
Vermont, it's like, what is happening here?
Well, and plus we've had the solar storms, so it's and I don't know, May has just been super weird. I don't know. I don't know if it was the lunar eclipse, but it's just been weird. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Smile. It's okay. We're also in Mercury retrograde. That could be.
That's right. I was thinking that. That's right. There you go. And that actually, I always feel it, because I am an air sign and Mercury is my thing. So
Gemini.
Yes. And it's
Gemini.
like,
Yep.
You too. It's like, yep. So we can feel it. We can feel it. Yay.
Oh, my words. But I was glad that Teri asked me before Mercury retrograde, because this is just the completion of a project. I didn't start anything new. Whatever it takes to get you through this, let me tell you.
I know we have to survive this thing. It's got to be over soon.
June something or other. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. So I had another question. Well, and by the way, like we said, anybody has one, just type it in the chat. We'll get to you. So from a personal standpoint, rather than a paranormal, exactly, what do you think of like the concept of quantum entanglement, or this? I've heard that called spooky something, which I can't think of the other name.
Action at a distance. It's a real scientific term used by Einstein himself. So this is, hey, it's science.
It talks about kind of the blurring of the lines, essentially.
Well, the fact that, you can be connected to somebody, from at a great distance and, feel the same thing that they feel, or, the stories you hear of, I know that, my best friend got into a car accident because I felt it, or twins that do that sort of thing.
Mothers and their intuition, because I've heard plenty of stories from those. Actually, yes. Now, personally, I tend towards the Jungian ideology a little bit, with the notion of maybe that subconscious and unconscious element that kind of ties us all together. And even as an artist, I would say that my personal opinion is that the job of an artist is to kind of feel what society is dealing with and to personify it. Now, personally, I do try to go for the happy stuff because the world is bizarre right now.
Yep.
As an academic, I'm completely and utterly frustrated because I'm like, oh my God, I know where we're going and this is not good. I think a lot of people see that, but I do think that there is that connectivity. And there have been plenty of times where people have reported depression, anxiety, these spikes before major events. And in fact, one of my paranormal team members in 2001 had a dream that trains hit the Twin Towers in New York, trains.
Wow.
And I even had this experience where I had come home from a vacation a week before the towers went down. And I remember looking at my house and I was so upset. I was so depressed. And it was like everything was covered in a cloud of dust. And it looked murky and dark and dirty. And I couldn't explain it. I thought, well, my heavens, maybe it's just because you're coming home from vacation, but everything looks fine. But it was that feeling. And I think that is something that absolutely transpires. I think we're more connected to each other than we realize, but right now, particularly with the internet age, and I love it for many reasons, but I also see the internet as kind of a dividing tool. And so particularly as a professor, where you're seeing students who are coming up who don't know how to communicate with each other or with me, or they're not taught and they don't have to. And so I think we're moving into something different. But I think that folks don't realize that we really are connected and that it's a very powerful connection. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's those personal and spiritual connections that really bring people together. So I always thought I would have one with somebody, but I haven't had that experience yet. I'm okay with that. But I have had plenty of
Right, here we go. I got one.
Oh, it's Kenji.
Like started throwing things.
And he ran away. He was like,
Got
oh no.
Well, he was about to toss and he's starting to fight. Okay, pillow. No. It's a new cat being sort of integrated into other two cat households. So we're having slight issues here, but it's okay. Sorry.
No worries. Trust me, if it wasn't for pets,
I know.
they're wonderful and they're frustrating at the same time, but they're mostly wonderful. I mean, I tell folks are like, I did not marry, no kids. I'm like, I have pugs and there's a reason, because I like pugs. People, I don't know, but I like pugs. We're okay. I just have to put up with their shenanigans. And I've had to explain to people that from year 1 to 7, they're very impish. They're very unpredictable. And that's what makes pugs fun. They're companion pets. From 7 until about 12, they're really cool middle-aged dudes. And they're just adorable. And then they become sweeter and sweeter as they age. And then I'm like, and their penultimate revenge is, of course, that death element, because when they die, it's just like you shatter because they're just so sweet and you're so attached. But they're so addictive, you just can't help it. You just keep getting them. That's how it works for me. Because you love them. And what I do try to tell people, and I've learned this from the paranormal as well, is instead of focusing on the death aspect or the negative, because life is loss. I mean, most of the religions tell you that, but focus on the life they live. And I just try to make sure they're happy. And as you can tell, they're very happy and very undisciplined. Maybe that's why they're happy, but it's fun. And they help you to refocus on what's really important.
Okay, I thought of another question for you. Have you ever lived in a haunted house? And if you haven't, if you did, do you think you would stay or move?
So the house that I grew up in is literally next door. It's my mother's house. And when we got in there, I did find out that somebody had committed suicide in the garage. I always thought it was because my room was a renovated garage space. It was like a mother-in-law, which was awesome because, I was a teenager at that point and I could have my independence, but be part of the house. And I always thought it was my area, but I never felt anything very strange. But I would go into the garage, particularly after 10 o'clock at night, and it would be awful. I would just have this impression that somebody was yelling at me or in my face. And I thought, okay, this is just really weird. You're just letting this stuff kind of sink in and it's suggestion. But I really did think the guy had committed suicide in my garage, in my area, because the garage that we had at that time was a later addition. Well, it turns out that garage is where the guy actually did commit suicide. And in fact, he was so bitter that he opened the garage door and he committed suicide in front of the neighbors that lived behind us.
Wow.
And so that was one of those really weird elements and times where you're like, okay, so my knowledge was actually wrong. The garage was a year older than I thought it was, but it was just that, and it turns out that the man was a woodworker. That was his hobby. He lived with his mother. They did not get along, and he would go out to the garage late at night to work on his woodwork. And that was kind of like his space and his private time. And so over time that did fade. It faded away quite a bit. In fact, now I don't think there's anything there. But the only concern I would have with a haunted house would be the entity itself, because I do have pets and I would have to make sure that their comfort level is okay. I don't think I would mind as long as they followed the rules, like don't bother me when I'm in the bathroom or shower, let me sleep, do not interrupt my dreams. But it would be trying to make sure that the pugs, I have pugs, rats, and bearded dragons, so just a diversity, but making sure that they're safe and comfortable in their home. That would be the big concern for me.
Okay, so somebody asked if you want to give us some info on personal encounters that you've had with the paranormal.
And it's funny because folks will watch the TV shows and they're like, oh my gosh, it's got to be like spooky all the time. And it's like, no, it really isn't actually. It's a lot of work. It's a work, but it's fun work. And what you do is you do these investigations for basically 5% of the cases where you have this overwhelming phenomenon. So some of my favorites, I've been in a building where the lights have turned on and off by themselves, which was fun. We located, the building was locked. We located the power source that was not being tampered with. There was no one else in the building. I have had cold spots, hot spots. I've had a hand on the shoulder. I have watched animals respond. I've had my own encounters. One of my favorites is my father. So after he passed away in 2012, he showed up in my house 3 times, which was interesting. I didn't see anything. I tell people I'm not psychic. I just see the results of ghosts. But 2 times, my mother and I were together in some way. So the first time we were talking about Pulp Fiction, and Perry Mason is my mother's favorite. She loves Perry Mason. And so my father liked The Shadow. And at that point I was studying The Shadow as well. So going back to the 30s. And I mentioned that we all 3 liked Pulp Fiction, and out of nowhere, and nobody is allowed to judge me on this, I have a 1994 Alec Baldwin The Shadow action figure, okay, from the movie, even though the movie sucked. But it was standing on my shelf, and this thing just jumped right off the shelf. And I'm looking at her, she's looking at me, and I'm in a 1-story building. We're both sitting down. Everybody's still, there's no traffic. I mean, I go through all the checklists. I can't figure this out. It never fell before. It hasn't fallen since, but it was just that perfect timing. But the one that really got me, I had inherited his car, which was a Saturn. And this was right during the big recall. And I was furious because my other car is a Miata. It's a 1996 and it has no AC, but I will never give this car up. I live in Florida. I will die in this car, probably, actually, because so I had the Saturn, the GE, whatever it was, the Saturn, and it had AC, and I was like, oh, thank God, because I'm not getting any younger. So AC was good. And then it was on recall, and I was like, oh my God, and nobody had the part, nobody. So I was really frustrated, and Saturn sent me this cute little letter saying, oh, hi, golly gee, we're so sorry we don't have the part, but you can try all these things and da, da, da. And I'm like, and I'm reading this letter on the phone to my mother, because at this point I owned the house next door to her. So I'm talking to her and I'm like, I can't believe they sent me this letter. It's so stupid. And I already did this, and just grousing. And I set the letter on the counter. I turned around. I started walking towards the pantry, and I heard this little thud behind me. And I turned around, and in the middle of the letter on the counter in my kitchen was a Monopoly car, which wouldn't be unusual, except that I had to find my Monopoly game, which was in the garage under boxes and sealed shut due to humidity. I was the only one in the house. There were no shelves. This game had been in the garage for several years. I have no explanation for this car at all. And I honestly, the fact that it landed in the middle of the letter while I was complaining to my mother, I think my dad was like, oh, would you please stop complaining? It was a free car. But I kept the car. I still have it on my windowsill. I've had folks look at it and they're like, yeah, that was your dad. But those are kind of the neat encounters. And every now and again, you do find kind of something darker. And usually if it is something darker, number one, the ghost is sometimes just frustrated and misunderstood. So we try to kind of talk it down and just say, look, we're not here to chase you. We're not here to harm you. If you wish to communicate with us, that is your option, but you have to do so in a manner that's safe. And then if it doesn't want to communicate, can't force it. And if people are still feeling very uneasy, then we will just say, well, thank you for your time. Good luck. Out we go. We can recommend other folks to the homeowners, but my feeling has always been you don't want to mess with that sort of thing, because if you mess it up, it's really bad. So, but yeah, it has been really intriguing. We've smelled perfume out of nowhere. I've stood with a group in a house that was 88 freaking degrees, hot as heck, because the homeowners at our request had shut off the power. And you actually, from one person to another, there was this cold column of air that passed by each one of us, kind of going through the group and out. And it turned out that was the area of activity, and it actually matched with a historical element that this hallway that we were in went to the room that belonged to the deceased. And it's things like that you just go, okay, that's awesome. And you just recount it, and you're excited, and it keeps you going for another 400 cases. So
that's fascinating. That's a really fascinating one.
It's fun. Yeah.
So we've got about 6 or 7 more minutes left in the panel. So I don't know if anybody else has questions. I haven't seen another one pop up in a couple of minutes, but
do we have something in the chat there?
Oh, okay. So Nydia says, why do you think people hang around after death?
So in this case, it's usually an attachment of some sort. So either they don't know they're dead, so they're still attached to life. They may be attached to the property. They may be afraid to cross over. There may be something left undone. So it really just kind of depends on the situation. Spirits versus ghosts. Spirit is something that can kind of cross back and forth, and oftentimes they're conveying information. They're checking in on people. And I basically tell folks, after all of these years, everybody gets one encounter, at least one, but everybody gets one that they cannot explain. And it's those encounters that kind of keep us on our toes and make us realize and remember that there is something more to this world than what we have. So it is kind of interesting. For example, one of my favorite stories is a friend of my mother. They had been married, this woman and her husband had been married like 30 years, and he passed away. She was devastated, but she was trying to go through the house and put everything in order, and she could not find his jewelry, his good jewelry, like his class rings and whatnot. And she was exhausted. She sat down, she just kind of put her head down for a second, and all of a sudden she said, it was like she had this vision that he was standing right in front of her, and he said, I know you can't find this stuff. You need to go look in this particular suit. And she kind of snapped out of it, and she thought, well, that's really weird, because he never wore this suit. He hated this suit. But sure enough, she went into the suit, to the closet, went to the pockets of the suits, this particular one, and there was everything that he had collected. So they convey information, they kind of keep watch over you. The negative ones, the ones that are still attached, those you have to be careful with. For the most part, what I have found is that entities just usually want to be acknowledged. This is my house, I'm still here. I'm not ready to go, and I want to be treated respectfully. And so as long as you can kind of convey that message, it's okay.
Cool. Anybody else? I know, adding to what you were saying about the jewelry thing, I had a similar thing with my mom. Like we couldn't find some of her jewelry when she passed away, and I know she had left it to me, and we even thought, we went to both of the hospitals that she'd been in and said, did somebody take them and just forget to return them? We didn't expect anything malicious, just maybe they had taken them off of her and meant to, just to get put with her stuff. Nobody had them, and on the day before we were going to leave where she was, we went to go move a piece of furniture, and it turned out that we tried to move it a few times. It was like an old jewelry armoire, so it had a lot of little drawers in it, but the top didn't open. But most of them, usually the top does open. Well, it turns out it was just stuck, and on the last day, right before I was going to give it away, the top opened up. Like, here is all this stuff, so that was kind of wild.
Yeah, it is interesting how it works out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually, I do try to tell folks, try not to be afraid, because if you think about it, what you project comes back to you, essentially. So if you get upset and you're talking to somebody while you're upset, they become upset. So usually I just, even no matter how hard it is, just kind of remain as cool, calm, and collected as possible, remain polite, and then kind of try to move from there. But that's why I get really upset with a lot of the ghost TV shows, is because they really show a fear element, and I just don't think that's right, and it's not fair. Life and death, I mean, part of being alive is that we are going to die, and death should not be feared as such. It's a transition, it's a different way. I mean, am I a little bit afraid of it? Probably. Hopefully I'm doing things right, but you never know. The fear that we have is unfortunate and unhealthy, because there really is nothing we can do. It's going to happen. And so, trying to learn to accept this other world, I think is kind of an important part, at least of what I'm trying to do. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
What? Sometimes when that kind of fear, I think it's normal for everybody to have that kind of death fear now and then. It just strikes you. And this is what I do. I tell myself, well, pretend that there's a door where you just have to go from one room to the other, and you're just terrified of going through that doorway. And that's what that is. So just don't be. You're gonna have to go through the doorway, so it's okay.
Well, and it's fun. I mean, you've got Wagner's Wager, you've got even Socrates, what happens after death? Well, at the worst, it's a great sleep. Right. Have the best sleep ever, right. And if that is the worst that happens, then that's the worst that happens. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, they got a point. So as a middle-aged woman, I would like a good night's sleep. I
know.
But and at the best, it's a transition, and you get to have a whole new experience, and that's what I'm hoping for. I think that'd be interesting. I'm going to go haunt all my friends.
I love transitions. I think that's one of the themes in the stuff I write, and I always like in my other series, the Cobweb Bride trilogy. There's a whole thing about Hecate, the goddess of. I just think she's so underrated, because she's this amazing crone aspect, but she rules like the doors and the transitions, and like, are you here or there, or here or there? And it's like this membrane. And if you look into science talks about membranes and, parallel, all the multiverse stuff. It's kind of the same thing. So it's like, I love that, the idea of like transitioning from one, whatever it is, to the other.
It makes sense, because unfortunately women have over time kind of lost this concept, but religiously speaking, you almost always have women as the bringers of life, and in bringing life, they bring death. And so that's where you have Kore, the pubescent, then you have Demeter, the life bringer, and Hecate, the death element. But what's really fascinating is that they also represent the seasons. And so you've got that kickstart where the seasons aren't just 1, 2, 3, they're 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so there's something that happens afterwards. So even Medusa is kind of that death element of femininity, but demonized. And I always thought that was kind of a shame. I think Medusa, you know, she
Yeah.
had rough actually. So yeah.
So much fun. I love these things.
That pretty much brings us to the end of our time. Thank you so much, Brandy. You've given us a lot of things to think about. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much. It was great. I loved it. I love this panel. It was fabulous. Amazing.
I had a great
I
time.
would like to remind everybody else, we have the next panel starts at 9 o'clock, and it's going to be the panel on the Atlanteo language. And of course, you get to see more of Vera for that. And Brandy, you're welcome to come join us on the rest of the panels if you like. You know, you sit in on anything.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And
Again, so much. This
we'll
is
see you
great.
in the next panel. Bye.
Take care.